Oh, Reverend Birch, how are you?
Very well, thank you. Good morning, David. How are you?
Oh, refreshed, renewed, returned, all the rest of it. It's a good thing, and it's the first time they've let you and me loose together, isn't it?
I know, but we're passing ships because you've
Ah,
obviously just had your holiday, and I'm in that kind of pre-holiday whirl of getting everything sorted
yeah,
before I go.
yeah. You got your walking sticks and your boots, or dubbined, or whatever.
Yes, yes, and looking forward to going to the lakes with my husband and the dog.
Good, good. Nice up in the lakes. Lots of water in the lakes, I'm told.
Yes, I hope it stays in its lakes rather than lots of water falling from the sky. But
Yeah.
you get the weather you get.
You most certainly, the Lord provides, as they say.
And that's fine. If we're not walking, then I
Yeah.
shall just be cuddled up with a book and chilling.
Good,
It's
good. Any
fine.
particular any particular books you're taking with you? And are you taking the new book that's just been released, 800 pages on sex and the church? Are you taking that?
Oh, oh gosh, goodness me.
I
No,
heard,
I'm
I
looking
heard on.
at Paul Bradbury's new book.
Yeah,
One of
Joe
his
and I are mentioned in that. Have you found us?
Lucy Bolster's mentioned, who's um, my pioneer colleague.
Yes, yes.
Who,
There's a
uh,
chapter on Joe and I. There's a
oh,
old chapter on Joe.
brilliant! A whole
Yeah,
chapter.
old chapter on
Haven't
Joe and
found
I.
that yet.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah.
haven't read it yet. You see yet.
Yeah, I saw.
I
Well,
will do.
I've read quite a bit of it. Yeah, it's good. I like it because it's readable. Whereas some of these books, you know, you really got to struggle over, haven't you? But it's good, and yeah, I won't spoil it. But Joe and I, the whole chapter dedicated to Joe and I about
Oh,
dying, how the church has to die to be born again.
oh, right. Yes, interesting, interesting. Okay, I will. I'll look out for you, David.
You will, you will. So they are. So you fame at last for Joe and I. But yeah, so you got your books, you got your dubbing boots and your walking canes or poles.
Yeah, loads
Got
of
'em together.
layers, lots of different layers.
Good, good.
Clothes, plenty of waterproofs.
Which means to your viewer that sadly you're going to be subject to Chris and I for the next few weeks. Reverend Debs is on sabbatical, so she's signed off with a big party, I understand.
Oh, wonderful party. Fabulous
Saw
music
lots of
and
pictures of
dancing.
it. Lots
Yes,
of
great
pictures of
fun.
it.
Great
That's
fun.
good. That's good. So she's off. Joe will be secluded in her office still in Salisbury on the Thursday. So you got up with Chris and myself. Don't let that drive you away, dear viewer. It won't be as bad as it could be. Oh, yeah. And we look forward to you coming back bronzed and relaxed, ready for the fray.
Lovely. Brilliant. Good.
For the lead up to Advent, and the word we're not allowed to say yet.
What's that?
Easter, Easter. That's the word, is it? Yeah, yeah, Easter. So there we are. So lots to do today. I think we ought to have a pause, and then you're going to read a bit of Mark for us, aren't you?
Yes.
So
Brilliant.
let's have a pause.
So our Bible reading is from Mark chapter 9, beginning at verse 30. They went on from there and passed through Galilee. He did not want anyone to know it, for he was teaching his disciples, saying to them, "The Son of Man is to be betrayed into human hands, and they will kill him. And 3 days after being killed, he will rise again." But they did not understand what he was saying and were afraid to ask him. Then they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the way?" But they were silent, for on the way they had argued with one another about who was the greatest. He sat down, called the 12, and said to them, "Whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all." Then he took a little child and put it among them and taking it in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me."
So right, I'm just turning the sound down off my phone because it suddenly went off in the middle of your reading. So,
It reminds me of it was not
uh,
about
uh,
when we have services in West Bay,
oh yeah,
in St John's.
yeah,
There are lots of motorbikes going past, so there's always
right.
that pause in the middle of the reading, let them go by, and carry on with the next sentence, and then the next lot come
Yeah.
roaring.
That also reminds me of Rev chats during lockdown, or when lockdown was just being lifted, and Joe and I were allowed to sit with it 3 yards apart or something like that. And we used to meet in her garden on a picnic table, either end of a picnic table, because we weren't allowed to be indoors together, but we could be outside together. People will remember. And we were wrapped up in woolly hats and coats at this table, with the wind blowing against the microphone, the tractors back and forwards all the time. So yes, I know the feeling. Well, there we are. Another bit of wise wisdom from Mark.
Yes.
What jumps out at you?
What jumps out at me is the contrast between the um, the negative way in which the disciples are being a bit like children. It's not fair. I want to be first. I'm the most important. All that, and then this wonderful um, uh, picture that comes across of Jesus taking a little child in his arms and saying, actually, we need to be childlike. We need to be like this innocent child. Um, and actually they, it's in that culture, children had very little power or agency or whatever. And um, so, being childlike, it's the people who are the least important who are the most important.
Yeah, I mean, I've often thought, when I've tried to think this whole scenario through, if you put yourself in it, where would you be? Would you be one of the disciples, the chosen three that have been up the mountain and seen the transfiguration? And if you were, would you feel a bit more superior than the ones who were left at the bottom and weren't allowed to go or weren't taken? Because if you see it in that sense, you can begin to understand why some feel more important than others because they were chosen and taken. On the other hand, the waiting often is the real thing.
Mm. I so long to be the child held in Jesus's arms, looking up with wonder into his face.
And you
And
are a child of God.
yeah, yes, that's who I want to be in the story.
Mm.
Um, and all the arguing about who's the greatest and all of that, it just seems um, so horribly irrelevant, really.
But
Destructive, actually. Yeah.
that's part of the human, the being human. That's what we're about, isn't it? We like to think perhaps we're important, or we like to think that we have a more important part in the story or the role than others, rather than just seeing the fact that waiting on God, being there in His presence, is what counts.
Mm,
And yeah, that story about the child and Jesus taking reminds me of the story in some of the Gospels, Mark, earlier as well, about when the children come to Jesus and the disciples are trying to get rid of them out of the way, and Jesus picks the child up and says, "Look, the kingdom of heaven is for these."
yeah.
And I always use that reading at baptism services, particularly for families that perhaps aren't regular church members, just to show actually your child and you are important to God,
Mm, mm.
and equally as important to God as those who come here every week and profess to be holy and good, like me.
And I love the wonder of a child. We just had earlier in the week in Sarum the lovely seminar on outdoor worship that
Yeah,
Joe
yeah,
was co-leading,
yeah.
and that was very much about going out into nature and exploring the wonder of creation, and very much can be all age. And the wonder of the way that we can learn from children, from their wonder, and they
Yeah.
can help us to appreciate the world. Um, yeah, that's very moving. But I was also struck in the reading, it did make me laugh, about um, the line, "Whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all." That
Yes.
reminded me of my training incumbent in my curacy, um, who who was a wonderful servant-hearted man, and he would go, um, first of all, when he was distributing the Eucharist, he would go first of all to people in their seats and distribute to them first, and he would receive last himself, not because he thought he was the greatest of all, not that at all, but because he was servant-hearted and wanted to serve those who were, the most infirm first. And when I arrived in Dorset, for the first couple of Eucharists I took here, I tried to do that same practice. But everybody, however infirm they are in Dorset, very determinedly gets up out of their seats and makes sure they come up to receive. And it was quite marked, the difference here in Dorset to where I was in Hampshire, um, in North Hampshire, where there were quite a number of people who stayed in their seats. Different culture.
I think so, and it's also what the tradition and practice is within that church. And if he'd been there a number of years, that's what had become the practice, isn't it? And
Yeah.
I often say within churches, um, it doesn't take long for something to become the tradition, does it?
Mm.
And I've often thought if I carried the cat up the aisle every Sunday on a cushion, after 6 weeks, if you stopped it, people would want to know why the tradition had been broken, wouldn't
Yes,
they?
we've always done it that way.
They've always done it that way, and I've noticed over the years this idea of servanthood, and I know many colleagues of mine who followed that same practice, not so much the going out first, but the waiting till the end to receive. And I've often done it myself, particularly when I was a curate many years ago, because one of our team vicars did it that way. And so whenever I was with him, as opposed to with one of the others, when you first start and you're being chaperoned wherever you go for safety of the congregation, um, yeah, you pick up these ideas. You try everything, don't you? And I think that's a nice model to take on, and it does remind us of Jesus's teachings that the
Mm,
first will be last and the last will be first. And I said to you just before we started recording, didn't I? I often jokingly say it if I'm at suppers, like with the harvest season just starting. I always stay till the very end of the queue, and people say, "Go on, Vicar, you better." And I say, "No, no, the last will be first in the kingdom of heaven," type of thing. And people laugh and joke about that, but there is something very important about recognizing the servant style of Jesus
mm,
and the
mm,
fact that it's so easy for us to get distracted away into not recognizing or not following Jesus' own practice.
mm. And in this, the fact that they're bickering about who's going to be first and who's the most
Yeah,
important and all the rest of it, when Jesus is contemplating his death
yeah,
and resurrection, and
yes.
the triviality of what the disciples are arguing about compared to um, the massive truth that is in this passage that they can't even comprehend
I mean,
until the
I
gospel
don't know.
comes.
I don't know, Kelly, whether anything is different for a lot of our people today, and even us at
Mm,
times.
mm, completely.
If we're not careful, we're so busy with doing or being
Yes.
that we overlook the simplistic reality that Christ is telling us that through him we have new life in the kingdom to come.
Mm,
And that what happens here is you're not going to work your way into heaven. I mean, you can read bits of Paul. Do you gain glory by works, or is it by faith and belief, or is it by, and the reality is that I think that our eternal future lies in the hands of God alone through His grace and His grace only.
Mm. That's
And
powerful.
just trying to please him all the time, or thinking they were pleasing him. He must sit there on his cloud, mustn't he? Thinking, "You fool, just get on
Yeah,
with it."
yeah. Why are you out to prove so
Yeah,
much?
why you
Why?
have to do it?
What
Just
have you
do
got
it.
to prove? I love you.
Yeah, and you know what I want you to do? It's to
Yes,
be, it's to be
rest of my
Jesus.
arms.
It's to be Jesus like. Love the poor, do to them whatever. And thought for today, I picked up, and I was getting ready earlier this morning. Um, you know, the person who was talking about it was talking about this to a degree in some minor way, that we're so busy trying to please all the time, we overlook the fact that God loves us. He wants the best for us. We are saved and redeemed by and through His grace. But while we're here, what He wants us to do is to be Christ-like and servant-like, and to show that love and care through how we are. And that's the ministry I've tried to lead all my life, really. That it's not about just going to church. It's about how you live your life amongst everybody else,
Mm.
and how you live out what Christ teaches us. It's not about lecturing or talking or proving how good you are. It's about the care and the love of Christ that you're able to bestow, and to encourage others to bestow in the wider world. And you know, I think we overlook it.
And I'm somewhere in the tension in this passage between, as I said earlier, wanting to be the child in Jesus's arms, um, but also that call to maturity,
Yeah,
to actually taking up one's cross, taking up that um, uh, example of servanthood. Um, um, Not that we're necessarily going to be called ourselves to crucifixion and resurrection in the same way that Jesus had to go through it. Not that, but definitely that growing in maturity and um, yeah, and that the servant focus, and that's a focus kind of off ourselves, isn't it? Off
yeah,
off ourselves and onto
and
serving.
that servanthood of Christ. We should remember every time we share together in communion, Eucharist, whatever you want to call it, breaking of bread, because it was at that moment in the supper when He tied the towel around Himself,
Mm.
washed the feet of others, and said, "Look, this is what I have to do. This is what you have to do." It
That's
is
one of the
about,
most wonderful moments in the year. We were talking earlier about how we're focusing on not the word that we can't mention, but
I
Easter.
know, no, can't mention
Um,
that word yet. No, no, no.
um, so
Baubles and all. No, can't mention it.
so in our focus on Easter, um,
Yes, yes, yes,
we can reflect on that lovely Maundy Thursday service,
yeah.
the
And,
washing of
and but
feet.
but but part of the robe issue. I mean, I know if you're a robe person strongly when he gets dressed. I mean, there are so many things about robes. And I was reminding people in a sermon a few weeks ago, when we had one of the passages, I think from the early part of James, or may have been when we were finishing off with Paul. Um, and he goes through all the things that we should robe ourselves with. And I was saying that I was given a little prayer sheet once many years ago by an elderly priest when I was a curate. He was in his 90s. And they were the prayers that he'd been given by his training incumbent 70 years ago, whatever it was, that you said when you robed yourself ready for
Oh
mass.
yes,
I know.
yes.
And you put on the helmet of salvation, or you put on the robe, or whatever. And there's a thing called a maniple. Have you know what a maniple is?
I know what I've never worn one, but I
I
do
only wore
know what
one
they
once, and
are.
never again. But the maniple was meant to signify, if I understand right, the towel of the
Yeah.
servanthood of Christ. Now, I wore a maniple once, and that was at Allington, because they gave me one when I stood in an interregnum once. and they gave me, and I put this on and ended up knocking everything over, so it soon was discarded. I laid the towel by the sink for future use.
But
But
what you said reminded me absolutely straight away of St Swithin's, because they've got these prayers up there actually
yeah,
that
that's
just
right.
just in front, as you're putting on the chasuble,
Yeah,
they've
yes.
got all these wonderful prayers on the wall that
That you say,
give
yeah, no, I've
people
read
to
them many
pray.
times.
Yeah,
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 I've
yeah,
read them many times when I've taken services during interregnums down there. I
yeah.
used to, I used to stand in for 8 o'clock quite often in days of old, and but it is important for us all to remember that we are all servants of Christ.
Mm, mm.
And as much as I think I'm more important than you because of being rural dean, of course,
Yes, yeah, yeah.
I realise that actually I am. No, yeah, that's a fallacy, and if and we get carried away if we're not careful with our own importance. And the important person is the down and out, the stranger. The wandering Aramean. That's where that thing of thought for the day came in. The thought for the wandering Aramean was meant to represent all those who live on the margins or are less fortunate than others.
And
So,
it's exciting to that there's movement in the margins. It can be an exciting there's a lot of there can be a lot of sadness. There's a lot of sadness in the margins too. But um I was really encouraged. We had Alpha yesterday, and
uh,
the exploration was wonderful, and the discussions and things opening up, and you know, uh, God moves in the margins for sure.
because, and in fact, I'll end that as we started with the fact that I've just been on holiday, and the second week, Jane and I went on a coach holiday to Brighton, which included a day at Eastbourne via Beachy Head in a gale. And I was amazed when I got up there. There's a brand new building at the top of Beachy Head, which is a chaplaincy centre.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful.
And 24 hours a day, churches in Brighton staff this for
Mm.
people to be there, chaplains, 3 or 4 of them at any one time,
They must
wandering
have saved
around.
loads of lives.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm,
And you realise that that's the work of God, being there for those who are despised, who feel there's no hope for the future.
mm,
And as we travelled around places, and I was saying to you, I'd read this book about the British seaside, and how it's been used as a dumping ground generally for drug addicts and homeless people. And we saw that a lot in Brighton, an awful lot of homeless people in the streets of Brighton.
mm,
You begin to realise that they're the people that God wants us to work with, and the
mm.
chaplaincy at the top of Beach Head is just one aspect of it all. So we thank God for His love and care for us, and remember that we must return to the servanthood that
And I
He.
feel since being ordained, never have I felt more keenly um, the the guilt
Yeah,
of the priest and the Levite in the story of the Good Samaritan.
yeah,
Yeah, I'm far too busy. I'm far too important. I've got loads of things
yeah,
to do. Do
yeah,
you know what's on my
yeah,
to-do list?
yeah,
Um, and yeah, that's I'm really challenged by that.
yeah. Yeah, and
And
we've
that
got an ongoing situation with a funeral at the moment where the relative of the person who's died is very disillusioned, apparently, with the church. I'm not doing it, Joe is doing the funeral. Very disillusioned and upset because nobody visited her while her mother was ill. And Joe I know, had said, "Well, we didn't know your mother was ill. Did you
mm,
tell us?" That's not the point, because to that person, we should have known. And perhaps this is where we're so busy doing other things, we're missing some of the simple things on the edge, if we're not careful. But there we are. We try our best. We try to do our
certain
best.
people we come across and it's a question of noticing
It
what's in
is.
front of
It is.
us and dealing with what's in front of us.
It is. It is. And that's where we are.
And
And all that will still be here when you come back from the lakes.
yes, as I swan off into the distance, not serving people but having time off.
Yeah, well, the Lord wants you to have that as well, because
Sabbath.
none of us can do it. None of us can continue forever without some type of refreshment. We need to refresh ourselves. So when do you go off to the lakes?
Sunday.
Sunday after
Yeah.
services, before services, after services.
Um Well, bizarrely, I don't think I'm rostered this
Good,
coming
good, good,
Sunday.
good. Good, good, good.
But I've got plenty of other things between now and Sunday, so
Never,
it's fine.
never. Oh, but you're not one of these people who's going to be tidying the house for the burglars, are you?
Oh goodness, no, no. Well, actually, we've got some people coming in to look after our cats and stay and enjoy the Dorset countryside while we're away.
Because
So that's
I always marvel at the fact that we have to tidy the house from top to bottom before we go away. And I always say to Jane, "But why are you doing this for the burglars? You know, we can."
it reminds me of the Yellow Pages ad
Yeah,
when there was a neighbour comes rushing up to this chap and goes, "I think you've been burgled. I think you've been burgled." And the state of his
yeah,
flat or house
yeah,
or whatever it
yeah,
is just outrageous. And
yeah,
then it kind of has flashbacks in the ad to all the mess he made
yeah.
that actually had caused the devastation that made the neighbour think that he'd been burgled.
Luckily, you can only see a very simple little view of my study at the moment. So,
And mine.
so there
Can't
you
see
are.
the desk.
But Callie, have a great time. Enjoy your
Thank you.
holiday.
Thank you
Don't
very
worry.
much, David.
All things will still be here when you get back.
And
And
I'll look forward to coming back to Rev Chat in due course.
yeah, and as I say to your viewer, you're lumbered with Chris and myself for the next few weeks at least, but you'll cope, I'm sure. Good to see you. Bye
Nice.
now.
See you. Bye.